Once upon a time in midwinter, when the snowflakes were falling like feathers, a queen sat by a window, the frame of which was made of black ebony. As she sat there looking out, she pricked her finger with her needle, and 3 drops of blood fell upon the snow. The red looked so beautiful on the white snow that she thought to herself, "Oh, if only I had a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as the wood of the window frame." Soon after, she had a little daughter who was as white as snow, as red as blood, and whose hair was as black as ebony. They named her Snow White. But when the child was born, the queen died. A year later, the king took another wife. She was a beautiful woman, but proud and arrogant, and she could not bear it if anyone surpassed her in beauty. She had a magical mirror, and when she stood before it and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" the mirror would answer, "You, my queen, are the fairest of them all." Then she was content, for she knew that the mirror spoke the truth. Snow White grew up and became more and more beautiful. When she was 7 years old, she was as lovely as the bright day itself, and more beautiful than the queen herself. One day, when the queen asked her mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" it answered, "Queen, you are full fair, 'tis true. But Snow White is 1,000 times fairer than you." The queen was shocked and turned green with envy. From that hour on, whenever she saw Snow White, her heart turned over in her body, so great was her hatred for the girl. And envy and pride grew so much in her heart like a weed that she had no peace day or night. At last, she called a huntsman and said, "Take the child out into the forest so that I never see her again. You must kill her and bring me her lungs and liver as proof." The huntsman obeyed and led Snow White into the forest. But when he drew his hunting knife and was about to pierce Snow White's innocent heart, she began to cry and said, "Oh, dear huntsman, leave me my life. I will run away into the wild forest and never come home again." She was so beautiful that the huntsman took pity on her. "Run away then, you poor child," he said. He thought, "The wild beasts will soon devour you anyway." Still, he felt as if a stone had been rolled from his heart because he did not have to kill her. Just then, a young wild boar came bounding by. He killed it, took out its lungs and liver, and brought them to the queen as proof. The cook was ordered to boil them in salt, and the wicked queen ate them, believing she had eaten Snow White's lungs and liver. Now the poor child was all alone in the great forest. She was so frightened that she looked at all the leaves on the trees and did not know what to do. Then she began to run, and she ran over sharp stones and through thorns, and the wild beasts ran past her, but did her no harm. She ran as long as her feet could carry her. When it was evening, she saw a little house and went inside to rest.
In the house, everything was small, but so neat and clean that it shone. There was a little table with a clean white tablecloth, and on it were 7 little plates, 7 little cups, 7 little knives, 7 little forks, and 7 little mugs. Against the wall stood 7 little beds, made up with white sheets. Snow White was very hungry and thirsty, so she ate a little vegetable and bread from each little plate, and drank a drop of wine from each little mug, for she did not want to take everything from one. After that, she felt so tired that she wanted to lie down and sleep. She tried one bed, but it was too long. Another, but it was too short. One was too hard, another too soft.
So she tried all 7, but none was right. Finally, the 7th bed suited her, and she lay down in it and committed herself to God, and fell asleep. When it was quite dark, the owners of the house came home. They were the 7 dwarfs who mined for ore in the mountains. They lit their 7 little candles, and as it grew light in the house, they saw that someone had been there, for things were not in order as they had left them. The first one said, "Who has been sitting on my stool?" The second, "Who has been eating from my plate?" The third, "Who has been taking a piece of my bread?" The fourth, "Who has been eating my vegetables?" The fifth, "Who has been using my fork?" The sixth, "Who has been cutting with my knife?" The seventh, "Who has been drinking from my mug?" Then the first one looked around and saw a hollow in his bed and said, "Who has been lying in my bed?" The others came running and cried, "Someone has been in my bed too." But the 7th, looking into his bed, saw Snow White, who was lying there and sleeping. He called the others, who came running with their 7 little candles, and shone the light on Snow White. They cried out in astonishment and said, "Oh, how beautiful the child is!" They were so delighted that they did not wake her, but let her sleep on in the bed. The 7th dwarf slept with each of his companions for an hour, and so the night passed. When morning came, Snow White awoke, and when she saw the 7 dwarfs, she was frightened. But they were friendly and asked, "What is your name?" "My name is Snow White," she answered. "How did you come to our house?" asked the dwarfs. Then she told them that her stepmother had wanted to have her killed, and how the huntsman had spared her life, and how she had run all day until she found their house. The dwarfs felt pity for her and said, "If you will keep house for us and cook, make the beds, wash, sew and knit, and keep everything neat and clean, then you can stay with us, and you shall lack nothing." "Yes," said Snow White, "with all my heart." So she stayed with them, and she kept their house in order. Every morning the dwarfs went into the mountains to dig for ore and gold, and in the evening they came home, and then their supper had to be ready.
But they warned her and said, "Be careful. Do not open the door to anyone, for your stepmother will soon find out that you are here." Meanwhile, the queen, believing she had eaten Snow White's lungs and liver, was sure that she was again the fairest of all. She stepped before her mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" Then the mirror answered, "Queen, you are full fair, 'tis true, but Snow White, beyond the mountains blue, with the 7 dwarfs, is still fairer than you." The queen was terrified, for she knew that the mirror never lied, and she realized that the huntsman had betrayed her, and that Snow White was still alive. And then she thought and thought again how she might put an end to Snow White, for as long as she was not the fairest in the land, her envy would give her no rest. Finally, she found a plan. She stained her face and dressed herself like an old peddler woman, so that no one would recognize her. In this disguise, she went over the 7 mountains to the 7 dwarfs' house. She knocked on the door and said, "Good wares to sell, good wares to sell." Snow White looked out of the window and said, "Good day, dear woman. What do you have?" "Good wares, pretty wares," answered the old woman, "laces of all colors." She held up one that was woven from colored silk. "I can surely let this honest woman in," thought Snow White, and unlatched the door. The old woman came in and said, "Child, how untidily you are laced. Come, I will lace you properly for once." Snow White suspected nothing, and stood before her and let her lace her with the new lace. But the old woman laced so quickly and so tightly that Snow White's breath was taken away, and she fell down as if dead. "Now you are the fairest," said the queen, and hurried away. Not long after, in the evening, the 7 dwarfs came home. How they were horrified to see their dear Snow White lying on the ground, still and motionless, as if she were dead. They lifted her up and saw that she was too tightly laced. They cut the lace, and she began to breathe a little, and gradually revived. When the dwarfs heard what had happened, they said, "The old peddler woman was none other than the wicked queen. Be careful, and do not open the door to anyone when we are not with you." The wicked queen, as soon as she was home, went to her mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And the mirror answered, "Queen, you are full fair, 'tis true, but Snow White, beyond the mountains blue, with the 7 dwarfs, is still fairer than you." When she heard that, all her blood rushed to her heart, for she saw that Snow White was alive again. "This time," she said, "I will devise something that will destroy you completely." She knew how to make a poisoned comb. She disguised herself again, taking the form of another old woman. She went over the 7 mountains to the house of the 7 dwarfs, and knocked at the door and cried, "Good wares to sell! Good wares to sell!" Snow White looked out and said, "You must not come in. I am forbidden to open the door to anyone." "You don't have to open it," said the old woman. "You can look at my wares here." She held up
the poisoned comb. It pleased Snow White so much that she let herself be tempted and opened the door. The old woman said, "Now I will comb your hair properly for you." Poor Snow White suspected nothing and let the old woman put the comb in her hair. But scarcely had the comb touched her hair when the poison worked, and Snow White fell down unconscious. "You paragon of beauty," said the wicked queen. "Now you are finished," and she went away. Fortunately, it was almost evening, and the 7 dwarfs soon came home. When they saw Snow White lying on the ground, they immediately suspected her stepmother. They looked and found the poisoned comb. "The mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And the mirror answered as before, "Queen, you are full fair, 'tis true. But Snow White, beyond the mountains blue, with the 7 dwarfs, is still fairer than you." When she heard the mirror speak, she trembled and shook with rage. "Snow White shall die," she cried, "even if it costs me my own life." Then she went into a secret, lonely room where no one ever came. There she made a deadly poisoned apple. From the outside, it was beautiful, white with red cheeks, so that anyone who saw it would desire it. But whoever ate a small piece of it would die. She disguised herself as a farmer's wife, and again went over the 7 mountains to the 7 dwarfs' house. She knocked at the door. Snow White looked out and said, "I dare not open the door. The 7 dwarfs have forbidden me to let anyone in." "It's all the same to me," said the farmer's wife. "I must get rid of my apples. Here, I will give you one." "No," said Snow White, "I dare not take anything." "Are you afraid of poison?" said the old woman. "See, I will cut the apple in 2. You eat the red side, and I will eat the white side." The apple was so cleverly made that only the red half was poisoned. Snow White longed for the beautiful apple, and when she saw the farmer's wife eating, she could no longer resist and put out her hand and took the poisoned half. But scarcely had she a piece of it in her mouth than she fell down dead. The queen looked at her with a terrible gaze and laughed loudly and cried, "White as snow, red as blood, black as ebony. This time the dwarfs cannot wake you up." And when she came home, she asked the mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" At last it answered, "You, my queen, are the fairest of them all." Then her envious heart had peace, as much peace as an envious heart can have. When the dwarves came home in the evening, they found Snow White lying on the ground. She breathed no more and was dead. They lifted her up, searched for poison, unlaced her, combed her hair, and washed her with water and wine. But it was no use. The dear child was dead, and remained dead. They laid her upon a bier, and all 7 of them sat around her and wept for 3 whole days. Then they wanted to bury her, but she looked as fresh as a living person, and still had her beautiful red cheeks. They said, "We cannot bury her in the dark ground." So they made a transparent coffin of glass so that she could be seen from all sides.
They laid her in it and wrote her name in golden letters on it, and that she was a king's daughter. Then they carried the coffin up onto a mountain, and one of them always stayed with it and watched over it. And birds came too and wept for Snow White. First an owl, then a raven, then a dove. Snow White lay for a long, long time in the coffin, and did not decay, but looked as if she were sleeping, for she was still as white as snow, as red as blood, and her hair was as black as ebony. It happened that a king's son rode through the forest and came to the dwarf's house, where he wanted to stay for the night. He saw the coffin on the mountain and the beautiful Snow White in it, and read what was written on it in golden letters. He said to the dwarfs, "Let me have the coffin. I will give you whatever you ask for it." But the dwarves answered, "We would not give it up for all the gold in the world." Then he said, "Then give it to me as a gift, for I cannot live without seeing Snow White. I will honor and cherish her as my dearest possession." The good dwarfs took pity on him and gave him the coffin. The king's son had his servants carry it away on their shoulders. But it happened that one of them stumbled over a tree root, and the jarred coffin caused the piece of poisoned apple, which Snow White had bitten off, to come out of her throat. And a little while later she opened her eyes, lifted the lid of the coffin, and sat up. "Oh, where am I?" she cried. The king's son, full of joy, said, "You are with me." He told her everything that had happened, and said, "I love you more than anything in the world. Come with me to my father's castle. You shall be my wife." Snow White was pleased and went with him. Their wedding was celebrated with great splendor and magnificence. But the wicked queen was also invited to the feast. She dressed herself in her most beautiful clothes and went before her mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror answered, "Queen, you are full fair, 'tis true, but the young queen is fairer than you." The wicked woman uttered a curse and was so terribly afraid that she did not know what to do. She felt a great dread, and yet she could not stay away from the wedding. She had to go and see the young queen. When she entered, she recognized Snow White. She stood rooted to the spot, terrified and full of wrath. Iron slippers had already been heated over a fire of coals. They were brought to her with tongs. She was forced to put on the red-hot shoes and dance until she dropped down dead.